Thames River Conservation Board Directors, August 29th, 2023, meeting to order at 9:30 a.m. We will start with the territorial acknowledgement. We begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Nunaapak peoples. We have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area. Of the First Nation.
Feel good.
Perfect. No problem. Oneida Nations of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Delaware Nation of Moravian Town. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all the original peoples of Turtle Island. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Seeing none, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? None. Do we have some? I believe we have some members who are joining us virtually. Are they?
Good morning, Chair. Peter Cuddy, I'm here.
Excellent.
Good morning, everyone.
Is it possible to have them on the screen so we just make sure we can see if they want to participate? Perfect. I always
I
ask.
have my screen on. I don't know if you can see me.
Yep, we can see you. Perfect. Thank you. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Okay, I'm seeing none. We will go to presentation and delegations, which we do not have any on the agenda today. So we'll move to administrative business. 5.1 approval of the minutes of previous meeting, June 20th, 2023. Is there a mover to move to accepting the minutes? George? Oh, and July 17th, June 20th and July 17th. So George moved, Skylar second. Is there any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, that's approved. I don't see any business arising from the minutes. Correspondence? Any correspondence? No correspondence. Excellent. We'll now move to item 6 on reports for consideration. 6.1 2024 budget discussions. Tracy, would you like to take us there, please?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. Just wanted to give a bit of a brief highlight, recognizing that this is the first full budget progress preliminary draft version, and at the time when we're seeking feedback from all of our representatives. Also, give a little bit more of a deep dive into what this process is and kind of a high level overview. I do have a presentation, but first off, I wanted to again note that it's everyone, it's the managers and Christine that are putting together this budget at this time to seek this input. It's been a significant effort this year with the changes to legislation, recategorizing our programs and services. We are learning a new software, Questica, in order to do this. It's a great tool, but it's still a learning curve. And it's taken a great deal of time. As well, when we have over 215 separate program areas with 90 full-time staff and about another 50 part-time staff, it's coding out all of that that goes into delivering the programs and services that we do. So with that, I'm going to ask Amy to pop up just a little bit of an overview. We can walk through what we've put together for the budget and some of the challenges with this changing regulation at this time. So next slide. So really, with the programs and services of this organization, it's longstanding. Our goal has always been about bringing value and as much value as possible to the environmental programming that you see in this watershed by leveraging other investments through the municipal levy. We look at partnerships and what you just saw with the Turtle program, we're able to look to other levels of government, other donors, any partners that we can make eye contact with, I think. We try to leverage those dollars that we receive from the municipalities. As mentioned, we have new legislative requirements that have really added another set of complexity. And created a set of restrictions on how we can leverage those dollars. What is considered levy, what is considered cost apportioning agreement. Then also with the new legislative requirement, there's also certain work that has to be done as those mandatory programs and services, as well as those strategies, those plans, the inventories, all that have to be done by the end of 2024. We know that's all without any additional funding from the province. As well, and this is a big constraint, is it does restrict where levy can be applied. In the past, we were able to levy predominantly was now category 3 programs, but there's very little levy dollars out there for those things that are considered mandatory. As well, and I'm sure many of you who attended AMO last week kept hearing about this area of the province is one of the most significantly growing areas in North America. So with all of the development pressure and growth also comes challenges when we're trying to. The next slide. So to kind of show a little bit of history over time, on where funding has come from. When looking at the provincial funding, the transfer payment, specifically for our hazard programs, that's shown in that light blue line across the bottom of the screen there. We see a slight dip in 2019 when that funding amounts were reduced by 50%. We've shown the municipal share of our expenses, which is the red line. Certainly it's risen, not keeping pace with the gap in other provincial funds, which are the darker blue line at the bottom of the screen, have been declining as well over time. Instead, we've been making up what you see in the green line through other partnerships and sources to fill that gap, to seek the support that we need to continue to run the programs and services that we do. So certainly you can see that visually over time, and that's the same graph that was provided in the report for you. Typically, I'd also say that historically, through board direction, we have not been increasing the municipal support at that rate, because there's generally been a very much a sensitivity amount to know that municipalities too have those struggles to find tax dollars and reducing those inputs on raising taxes. Next slide. As well as outlined in the report, just a high level of what these regulatory changes are under the mandatory programs and services regulation. That's at 686/21. There's those needs for the operation asset management plans, ice management plans, strategies to guide the management and use of all of our conservation authority owned land or controlled properties. And then also the lands inventory, the land acquisition disposition strategy, and our watershed-based resource management strategy, which require consultation pieces as well. We've certainly shown the costs associated in the preliminary budget on lines 5, 11, and 12 to highlight what the grouping of those different deliverables are. Under Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act and the More Homes for Everyone Act under Bill 109, we've been kind of awaiting the implementation of some of those pieces of regulation and the costs for increased service standards, our service delivery for the administration of both our permits and any development reviews through pre-consultation and pre-application, right up to the consultation on our hazard mappings project. Again, updating those hazard maps are part of making informed decisions, and especially when hazards and making sure that new development locates and avoids those hazards. We've also overall shown the global picture of about $1.5 million new work is identified in the province, all to be completed by the end of 2024. We've shown the staffing increases necessary to undertake all of this work equates to about 9.4 FTEs. And we separated them out there with 3 full-time equivalents to undertake all the work for our land strategies and the requirements under the mandatory programs and services, about 2 FTEs for meeting the timelines of the 109, and then a number of 4.4 FTEs for updating and finalizing our hazard mapping and modeling, keeping that mapping and modeling update and the technical review that goes along with that. And then as well, the consultation piece. When we're expecting additional Section 28 regulation changes, possibly even later this year for implementation next year. So with the draft preliminary budget, really is intended to be this opportunity for discussion. We're seeking input right now. Also to show all the challenges we have and how we can move forward. So, and following again, what the province has now required us to do to categorize our programs into category 1, 2. It's a very different. It's kind of like comparing apples and oranges. We certainly categorize all our mandatory programs as category 1, costing just over $12 million. And under the regulation, it can be apportioned to be as levy. But we've also shown through the draft how we've always, again, gone back to what we've done historically, how we try to support that municipal levy and offset those costs at the tune of 59%. Also, through our corporate costs, they are as well considered mandatory programs. But we allocate out. We've had a history of always allocating out the costs for those broader overhead categories, whether they be HR or finance, overhead in this building, computers, into where those costs arise and through allocating them to each individual program area. And the overall result is at 1.5 million in additional expenses to undertake all this. But comparing it to 2023, it would look like a 24% increase in levy with an operating deficit of around $800,000. I'd say as well, in the past, we typically have forecasted a deficit anywhere between $500,000 and $600,000. So we are aware that there's typically other funding opportunities that are announced later in the year that we're eligible for, and we apply for those. Sometimes those applications don't initiate until the fiscal of the following. Again, we are always working to try to capture those additional funds. Next one. So some alternatives for discussion and wanting some feedback on, looking at that 1 million in levy for category 1 shown for all of our mandatory programs and services, with an additional 600,000 for category 3. Again, these will depend on our cost apportioning agreements that will be leveraged just for the category 3 programs that we're asking for agreement for. A 1 to 4 contribution for every dollar. We're able to find $4. We look for municipal funding category 1 at 59% of full cost. It's been shown in the draft that we've provided. And then updating and revising and tracking expenses and changes in soft funding and forecast for 2023 and using those as surplus instead. Another option would be to look for reducing the deficit in category 1, but absorbing that 811,000 in shortfall, even with the additional funding that's being proposed. Again, that increases the funding of category 1, showing that 59%, instead showing it as 66% of the full cost, with additional 600,000 levy for category 3. Again, depending on those agreements. And then as always updating and revising and tracking our expenses for soft funding and forecasts into 2023 as surplus. Third option or alternative that we've looked at is move all the levy from category 3, which is in the neighborhood right now of 632,000, into category 1, so that the municipal funding of category 1 increases from 59% up to 63% of the full cost. But that would show a deficit in category 3 of more than 1.2 million. And we're always concerned with this because we feel that it really puts some of those category 3 programs at risk. They're already heavily supported by other sources of revenue. But we're also concerned as well that there is a worst case scenario there, that if we would lose those category 3 programs, not have those agreements to fulfill, those programs also carry a huge burden with our corporate costs, because we currently allocate those costs out to all programs that are covered. Because certainly those corporate costs are considered mandatory regardless. And as you can see on the slide there, those corporate costs are over $780,000. So that would be moved into category 1 as well. So we certainly don't recommend this option, but it's certainly an option that we'd like to hear some discussion on as well. Because we also feel that, again, like you just heard from Scott's presentation, there's a tremendous value to the organization and tremendous value to the environment when we're providing those programs. Next slide. And then a last note here to discuss would be looking at the draft budget as circulated, including that additional 1 million in levy for category 1 for mandatory programs premises, the 600,000 levy for category 3, and on caveat that cost apportionment agreements are all signed. Municipal funding of category 3 at the 59% that's shown of the full cost. And then, as we always do, update, revise, and track our expenses and soft revenue through 2023 and use those amounts as surplus. So there's also a note here that any deficit in 2024 of the 811,000 shortfall would be recouped in 2025. So if we still had a deficit budget, we'd be shifting that off to 2025. So with that, the last slide, I think we've just got at a glance to look at the different discussion, or sorry, this, I'm ahead of myself here. We want to have this open discussion, planning to have a either in September or October, depending on how much additional effort and work we're putting together to formulate this. And then also having the communication and support to provide to municipal councils as we circulate our budgets through the fall, final budget approved at the AGM in February. So just a little timeline there. Next slide, at a glance, just some of the operating costs that we're looking at for 2024 in the neighborhood of 22.7 million. That would show a levy increase of 1.5 million or so, with a projected deficit of 1.2. You should see there. We also have a capital expenditures deficit of 1.8. It is a complicated budget, and I'm sure there's lots of questions, but with that, all of our managers can certainly speak to any questions, and Christine is here as well. Discussion.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will ask that we keep it to just questions at this point, and then we'll have discussion afterwards. But I will certainly open up the floor to questions, and we'll start with Sandy.
Thanks. Certainly want to thank staff for the hard work in pulling this together. It's a totally different process and a totally different look, which makes everybody's work harder, including the boards. I want to start by working a little backwards, because the key issue is going to be discussion with municipal councils. And when is that discussion planned, and how does it relate to the timing of the municipal agreements for category 3? Do you have that information?
Yes, through the chair. With the timing of the budget discussions, again, when we come back and have a preliminary draft or draft approved by this board, September, October, again, depending on how much work requirements, it would be going out in October, by the end of October. for feedback and further discussion with the cost apportionment agreements. The way that they're structured, and some of those agreements, discussions have already happened. A few have actually been signed already, but it's recognizing that the category 3 agreement will follow and be predicated on our budget each year. The budget is kind of a separate schedule in the back of the agreement. Again, for those cost apportioning agreements, it's not the levy portion of the budget. That feedback will be gathered on an annual basis as well.
Mr. Chair, the reason I'm asking the question is because part of this discussion and options relates to the category 3 agreements. So it almost sounds like we can't really give direction on shifting funding between category 3 and category 1 until we get clarity on the category 3 agreements that are being discussed. Is that fair to say?
To some extent through the chair, I would say the language used in the agreements, again, is kind of anticipating. The example was given that anticipation that it would be similar to category 3 from previous years. But again, those discussions have to happen. So shifting it all has never been the option. Certainly it would eliminate the need to have a comprehensive agreement signed by all participating municipalities if we were choosing to not have any cost apportionment dollars.
But go back to the slide that talked about moving them, because I don't think we really can give a direction in moving that today. Because it's chicken and egg. In my mind.
So if I get this right, what staff is asking for is, I think if the municipalities agree to fund them through cost apportioning agreements, then they'll be funded through that.
Yeah.
But if they don't, well, we have to fund them somehow, if we want them as a board,
Right.
and that would be through forced levy.
Yeah, but all I'm getting at, Mr. Chair, is by October, we may or may not have enough information to be able to make that decision.
So I would suggest that we give the suggestion that we say, okay, do we want to fund these if municipalities don't? But
Go back a couple
Go back a couple of more. Where was,
more.
yeah, additional,
Move all the way to category 3.
yeah. Mr. Chair.
yes.
Please.
I wonder if it's a bit of, through the chair, it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, because I would assume municipalities are gonna say, what is our levy? And then we'll decide what's our budget, then we'll decide whether we want to support category 3. Or, I can't imagine they're gonna go to, now they're going, sure, we'll support category 3, but they haven't really seen what the big picture is. So in trying to put this together, we went, okay, well, assuming right now it's all levy, it's all gonna come from municipalities. It's 600 in category 3 plus what we're putting in category 1, it's all levy. You're gonna go back and have to ask for all of that, and I can't imagine they're gonna care whether, it's the total they're looking at. So that's kind of how we approach this, if that makes sense.
All right.
So because, we could say we want you to decide on this baseline budget.
Yeah.
Guess what? We have all this other over here that you're supporting right now. We can add those on as apportionment agreements, or we're kind of looking at it all as one big piece. That's how we decided, because it's difficult to explain that even.
Yeah.
Yes, to even
Yeah.
experienced board members, but at municipal councils, this is going to be so much fun. So.
Yeah, and that sort of what I was getting at, Mr. Chair, is, it may be an alternative at some point to move it from category 3 to category 1, but you're right, the municipalities don't care. They're paying it either through levy or through an agreement. So from our perspective today, I don't think we really need to do anything with that piece of the puzzle. Wherever it falls out, it falls out. If the municipalities decide whatever X dollars they're willing to pay doesn't cover the category 3, then either we use our levy powers to put it into category 1, or we just hold the programs. Those are the alternatives, but we don't have to make that decision today.
So a question through the staff on that is the difference someone may pay, a municipality may pay if it's cost proportionate could be significantly different how much they benefit from it than what would be apportioned through levy. And so how is staff going to, so if we made the decision to go with alternative 3 today, we would not be able, I don't want to give the municipalities, again, this is a lot of information for the board. It's a totally different, actually the new members of the board have it very easy. You're dealing with a new type of budget for the first time. This is a drastic, this is a 180-degree turn from what we're used to seeing for numbers, because the situation is different. So I'm worried about municipalities as well, and how many options there are on the table. And certainly I don't know if the province thought about this when they brought out the rules. This is the first time everybody's going through. This is a drastic change as well on how this is explained to people, and I agree with Sandy's. So if I'm giving option A, I'm worried about is that municipalities are going to see if I have option A, which is category 3 funding, and let's just put a round number on $100,000. But if it's a portion to levy, I only pay $50,000. And they go, well, I want it on levy. Whereas another municipality is going to see it backwards. And then we're going to have a discussion about how do we actually get there. We're going to have disagreement with members of municipalities about how do we fund things. So I think it is fundamental to the board to have the discussion about how we want staff to pursue this, either through agreements or through levy. So there's clarity there, at least for staff, when they're discussing with municipalities about our preferred. And then we can always put a preferred in there. And then if we're hearing feedback from municipalities on a different thing, that will be part of the feedback process through staff to the board for budget. But it's certainly changes. It's not either A or B and it's the same cost. There's different calculations there that have to take place. Further questions?
Yeah. In the presentation, you mentioned that of the 1.5 million that's been mandated because of provincial changes, only $1 million is in levy. It's a little over 60%. I'm curious to know the thinking behind that, because one way of saying it is we wouldn't have had a 1.5 million costs if the province didn't make these changes. Shouldn't all of it be levied since the province isn't paying for it?
That's through the chair. That is one of the questions. However, we tend to apply our principles from the past. If we have other revenue that we can put towards it, either through, and Christine can correct me if I'm wrong, but we're looking at things like our revenues that we generate from our ag land leases, our investment portfolios, to offset those costs as well.
Okay.
Anything further to add?
Well, 60% is the amount that levy funds category 1 mandatory work. So if we roll in the additional work to the work already existing in category 1, what would spit out is a 60% levy cost.
So my understanding that the reason 60% is used is because that's our traditional allocation. Roughly.
Not really.
Okay.
Because, and really, I'm going to go very slowly because I need to keep it straight too. Traditionally, our levy has approximated 35% of our entire budget.
Which is a really good point. I'm sorry for interrupting, but it's really low compared
Very
to all
low.
the other conservation
Yeah,
authorities.
that's levy as a portion of the entire organization.
Yeah.
When we have to go and divvy up the organization into 3 categories, because that's effectively what we're required to do now. When we take the levy that we've always received and we say, oh, well, this is the mandatory work, and we load up category 1 with levy, The best we could do is get it to 59.
Hmm.
But this is mandatory work that somebody needs to fund, some body, some government, right? We can't actually get that 59% higher than 66 and get it fully funded because we have these other sources of revenue that we apply here. So if we took out those other sources of revenue from category 1 programs, put 100% levy in, yeah, the levy would go sky high. We could fund our category 3 programs, generally speaking, but the provincial regulations require us to demonstrate how we defray the cost of levy through other sources of funding. So that's where the 59% comes from, all of those machinations and the other sources of funding. It's what's left. And we still have a deficit in category 1.
We can still move. We can move things in and out. You know, we could say we're going to take the agriculture land lease revenues out and put them into category 3 and up the levy even higher. We're trying the best to keep the levy as low as we can get it.
But it's still going up.
All right, so then am I understanding that there's really 2 main levers that we as a board can direct you to work on? One is, it's in the recommendations around the COLA, the increase to what we pay our staff, because their staffing costs are the biggest component. And you've made a recommendation of 3%. If the recommendation was 2.5%, how far down would that bring the deficit from 800,000 to a different number? Maybe we can have that for October's meeting. I don't expect you to have it off the top.
It won't eliminate the deficit.
No, I'm not suggesting that we eliminate it per se, because my recollection is, and somebody, Christine, maybe you can correct me, our budget has always come forward at this point in time with a deficit. Is that correct?
No, we actually present our first draft budget in October, traditionally.
Yeah.
We're a few months early with this.
Right. But my recollection is we usually see a deficit of some sort
Very
after
often.
depreciation.
Yes.
But the only, I feel like I have to jump in, is the only difference here is that this is a deficit in category 1, mandatory programs. It's not a deficit in category 3. There is a deficit in category 3 too, where I've, even on the record would say confident, we could probably find that $630,000 because we can do stuff like that. If we get going on it, we can't necessarily find funds for mandatory programs. They are the things that we have to be doing. It's not like we can get it unless NDMP came out again or some big, in terms of capital costing programs came out. Much more difficult to find that funding.
The last piece that I think we have some ability to get some new information between now and October is, my understanding is we have a tentative contract, or we have a contract with Environment and Climate Change. Is that correct?
Yeah, we don't have a contract. We've had meetings and we are cautiously optimistic that they have an enormous amount of work to do and they will need us to help them. And the work that they want done aligns with our objectives as an organization around nutrients and water quality. So yes, there should be big bucks coming up.
You plugged a number into this budget already. Is it possible that by October we would know and have more coming from that? Is there an end? Have you been very conservative as usual with revenue? The revenue might be higher come October, and that would be reflected in what this board will see in October. Is that correct?
I'm afraid to say yes, because I don't want to jinx myself, but I'm going to say, well, we're going to have much more solid information. They will come back out to us once the summer is over. They will come back out and start some serious negotiations.
And you're hopeful that you'll have something in writing by then. So we don't have to fully panic at this stage. Is that fair to say? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Further questions? Scarlett,
Yeah.
Anna, and then Scarlett.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just want to stick with the questions around our municipal agreements. Where are we and will we be able to get better information at our next board meeting? And would that help frame the conversation and the discussion around the levy? I just want to have a better understanding about that.
Yeah, through the chair, I can say that we have two municipalities, Thames Center and Middlesex Center, who have council resolutions to enter into the agreements. Oxford County is just being finalized. We received the final draft on Friday. And City of London. I think it's the second week in September to move that forward. And then I'll be scheduling the remainder in September to get out to see some of the municipalities to the north. But again, those agreements I think are good to have in principle. They set out what services are being established, and then one schedule of that agreement relates back to our budget. It reflects that annually we'll be looking at the cost apportionment amounts through our regular budgeting process. So that's how the framework of those agreements have been, and municipalities seem to appreciate that because it makes it simple to follow our process that we've had in place for many years.
Yeah, just as a follow-up, Mr. Chair, to staff. So no concerns around the municipal agreements going forward. I'm hearing everything is following through normally. The City of London does a 4-year budget. How is this new process that we're undertaking clear that, or does it complicate things? And the reason I'm asking that, and it kind of adds to the other concerns that we really aren't sure about Section 28. We're not sure about fees. Like everything just seems to be, we're not sure about things moving forward. So under these conditions, the negotiations, and I'm asking this on behalf of the City of London because it's a big part of the money that we contribute. Is that a concern, or is there better information that we can provide to assist us as we go through in the fall, the 4-year budget for the next 4 years? Or how can we better understand and bring that information to our councils on the challenges that we're being faced with?
Through the chair, we have been participating in the City of London's 4-year multi-budget process. And one of the big business cases that we have for the city is the legislative changes piece. Recognizing that that's significant and it's not optional. We can't just say, oh, we're going to ignore this. We're not going to do anything about it. These legislative changes are real and we have dates. We don't have a firm date on the Section 28, but we're very confident that it will be happening, if not this fall, very early in the year. We'll have to do it in 2024. It's something that we've wanted to move forward with for some time and have been waiting with the updated regulation. But those, again, are the biggest challenges and the biggest pieces of the budget are to deal with those legislative changes.
Skylar.
Yeah, following up on that, when I was at AMO, I heard Minister Clark say to the audience that he's very open to having dialogue with people to discuss the unintended outcomes of Bill 109 and 23 specifically. Somebody from a municipality asked, you've given us all these strict timelines, but there's no timeline on the developer side to build something. So in London, we've approved 18,000 units of our 47,000, but there's no timeline for the developers to build. So I'm just wondering, have you guys had any dialogue with various ministers, given that it looks like the budget bomb is specifically from Bill 23 and 109 to say, if this work is being undertaken and the cost is directly from a provincial legislation, will you be planning to make conservation authorities whole in the same way that you've said you'll be making cities whole? So I'm just wondering if you've had any of that dialogue with the province.
Yes, through the chair, our umbrella organization, Conservation Ontario, we're at AMO as well and seeking those same type of discussions. Because yeah, I think like municipalities, everyone have had these unintended consequences. And some CAs started to implement that, the greater Golden Horseshoe, they started seeing some of these effects maybe a couple of years ago, but that rollout effect, it's really hitting us this year.
And following up, I'm wondering, so we talk a lot at City Council in London about provincial downloads. We're seeing with our health unit, our ambulance services, our police services, we're paying for a lot of healthcare items. I see this as another download and then an upload. I'm just wondering if you have, again, any thoughts as to what happens if we go back to our councils, none of our councils want to pay for provincial funding, what would happen if we reject a levy increase at a council?
There is a process for that, and I think you'll end up paying for it.
It's mandatory.
Levy.
Yeah, reject. Interest.
It's much like taxpayers. They don't want to pay, but at the end of the day, we do have powers to issue that levy. And especially since it is directly tied to mandatory programs, it'd be very hard to, maybe the optional programs that they could choose whether or not to, and the cost approachment agreements that they've services they've asked for, but the mandatory levy is directly tied to legislation.
I have one more follow-up, and perhaps it's for our solicitor. I am wondering what perhaps outcomes would be or consequences if we don't deliver the various strategies from Bill 23 and 109, if they're not delivered on time next year in December 2024.
Is there staff like to answer that? I guess the question is nobody knows. It was whether the government would choose to take action. That's something that they would have to decide to do. So certainly they've set guidelines, and so everybody's trying to meet them. I really appreciate all the work that staff has done to try to meet them. Certainly being on the board when these were announced, all of a sudden it's like, oh, we got lots of time, and then bam, we're here. And so now we are here, and it seemed to be going, there's things moving forward, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, now we're seeing the budget impacts of the changing budget and how this. I think this is, to me, the biggest impact of this whole process is how the funding comes together and how these budgets work. That's the biggest impact. And I don't know if it was an intended or unintended consequence from the provincial legislation and the lack of consultation and the lack of, frankly, knowledge of how conservation authorities work before making legislation, that these outcomes are here. And so I certainly call upon all our municipal partners. I can definitely tell you that I wouldn't be surprised that our municipal partners are not happy when these items are presented. It's a significant increase. 24% increase is huge. But this is because of issues being regulated through regulations to us. So I'm sure groups like AMO will be hearing about this, different things, but right now we do as a board have to make a decision about how we want those apportionments to be presented in the budget to our municipalities. Is there any further questions? Is there anybody online that has it? Oh yeah, sorry.
One
Scott,
final
yes.
little one. I'm just wondering again, given, and I'm going to keep on harping on this, but I almost. Are there any templates from the province, any like worksheets that outline what these strategies are supposed to look like, or can they be simple 2-page documents?
Through the chair, not from the province, there's no templates, but Conservation Ontario have been working with CAs as the one report, our land inventories piece. Brandon sat on that committee to help develop that template for other CAs to use. But the other piece of the strategies themselves is the public consultation piece. And again, we're required to develop something. We do want to add that value. We want it to be used. So yeah, there's certainly the option for a two-sided, but I don't know if that would serve us well.
Cindy, please.
Yeah, on page 6 of our agenda related to the budget, there's a piece about planning and regulation piece at the top of the page, and you're the chair to the general manager. You were on a call with the CEO last week where this was to be discussed, to trying to get some certainty whether or not the planning and regulation fee direction is going to be extended or not. Do you have any further information for us?
Through the chair, there is no confirmation that it was going to be extended or released. And what the vice chair is talking about is the minister's direction back in December. We were told to freeze fees. The suggestion from discussions that had happened was that CA should just look for modest cost of living type increases on their fee schedules related to planning and development.
So the question then through the chair is, in the budget that's been presented, what approach was taken for fees?
Through the chair, the budget shows a 50% cost recovery on fees, assuming that there'll be increased fees to deal with the added capacity needed to deliver on the fund.
So
Would not be realized. Unexpected, it would not be expected to be realized, the fees that are shown in the draft that you've seen.
So again, we'll have more information by October, and if there's any changes, it'll be reflected.
Yeah.
Okay. The other question I have, Mr. Chair, was one of the things that surprised me when I joined the board a few years ago was that we actually pay a lot of property taxes to our municipal partners. How much in property taxes do we pay to our municipal partners? I'm assuming that's an expense item. So rough number.
Exact 322,000 a year of our budget is property taxes.
We have to pay that.
We have to pay our property.
Just like
We're a landowner.
we get levy power, we got.
Property tax.
I find it really interesting though that it's a push-pull, obviously, in that.
But to be fair, that would not be municipality A. What we owe them is not equal to what
No,
the
of
bill
course
is.
not.
So
Yeah, no, of course.
probably, let's be honest, London's probably paying municipal taxes to a lot of other municipalities.
Yeah. But I just for the benefit of the new members in particular, it was an interesting piece of this budgetary puzzle to realize that we pay them as well. So I don't know how you want to proceed on this, Mr. Chair. I really do think that maybe we want to adjust some of these recommendations based on the discussion, but I'm in your hands.
Are there any further questions, Jim?
Thank you through the chair. I guess the one thing that stuck out to me, and I understand that we, as board members, we're being mandated that we have to do these extra projects, but 9.4 full-time employees, is that like pretty close to 10% of our workforce? We have practically 100.
Yeah,
It's just seems very significant of a large cost of what we're talking. You know, and I understand it may be a very conservative, but I think that's going to be a tough sell to say that you're being mandated X and you're going to carry on with everything, but increase work staff 10%.
Yeah, I think that's an unintended consequence of not having proper consultations before the legislation came out of what are the goals and how can conservation authorities reach those goals without necessarily just having to be told, mandated that these changes take place. Conservation, as the authorities have done an amazing job, either on timelines for permits, they have stricter permits. So if there is a goal put out there, maybe we should ask the experts and see where we can get to try to meet that goal before just mandating something. And now we're seeing the unintended consequences of that. I have a question as far as how much of this is ongoing versus short-term costs to do with like the strategies and stuff like that. Is there gonna be an ongoing cost or is it just a short-term? Well, I will say.
when dealing with the strategies, speaking about the land strategies, for example, not only are the initial costs for undertaking the strategy, but then updating that strategy, because all of these strategies require routine updates, but as well, our shift will be from the land strategy, for example, into improved asset management about our property. When it comes to the watershed resource management strategy, it's the strategy itself, and then implementation of that strategy, the reporting on that strategy too. And then when it comes to the hazard, or sorry, what was the third one? The operations plans, things like that. Much of that was dealing and using existing staffing. So there wasn't an additional staff added for that one. So each strategy has a little bit different slant when it comes to the hazard mapping and modeling project. It's not necessarily the strategy itself, but it's to update Section 28 regulations. Again, it's having that capacity in-house. And to be able to continue update and provide those updates to modeling, because as we're seeing, there's a lot more activity happening on the ground, and again, wanting more feedback and more quick updates happening so that municipalities can have that updated mapping on a more regular basis too for their decision making. So some of the challenges with the environment that we're living in, with so much growth happening in this area too.
But I think Jim's made a really good point. I think it would be helpful to the board in October to get supporting information from staff on the increase in staffing.
Okay.
I think I think it's a fair question to ask, that if we're going to support this, we need to have good rationale behind it. For leaders to take that information back to their municipalities.
If I could have input on that, I know through our county budgeting, all FTEs are accompanied with a business plan. And so that would show exactly where they, but certainly up to staff for that. Paul and then Dean, please.
Yeah, I just want to follow up on Jim's topic that Jim raised and Sandy expanded on us with. If the rationale to have 9.4 new full-time positions to handle transition, are those positions permanent positions? Do these staff people are going to be, once we're through all this transition work, are they going to have other jobs to do, or are these contract positions where they're going to be here for a couple of years until we meet these deadlines? So I think that's basically what Andy said. You just beat me to the. I would like that information, but when you add that significant amount, and I presume these people are in the higher pay range with the expertise that they're bringing to us, I agree, we should have some more information on what these people are doing for the next year and a half. What are they going to be doing after we meet these end of 24 deadlines?
You please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, apologies to Chris, his that level of anxiety may increase with the question, but it's about the asset management plan. The schedule, I'm kind of looking at the next report for section 8.2. The timeline for completion of that one component is December 2024. So as it relates to the budget, is there any way that we can kind of accelerate reporting on that plan, because that plan will identify future budget necessities? So to Councillor Hopkins' point about getting some budget certainty, I'm asking if there's anything that can be done to give us a quicker idea of what the asset costs of the asset like the capital costs as it relates to the asset management planning report. Just wondering if we can kind of get that information sooner rather than later, so that we can consider what that budget implication will be in future discussions.
We have maintained a 20-year capital asset plan for a decade or more now. So we already have a good handle on that. Not to say that it doesn't change as we complete studies such as the dam safety reviews that are ongoing, which identified pretty significant, or can identify pretty significant work in there. So I'm not sure that speeding up the asset management plan to get those policies and procedures in place would necessarily provide you with the additional certainty that you're asking for.
I think, just to jump, I think that, what Dean's asking for is the much more, expansive asset management plan beyond just the capital assets, as expands into facilities and, vehicles and such. The more comprehensive asset management plan. My understanding is certainly those flood control items are certainly asset managed. But the regulations is asked for more in-depth asset management plan. So staff comment on that, if it's what the timeline is to complete those larger plans.
Through the chair, really what the regulation speaks to at this time is the flood control infrastructure asset management. But we know that once much of this work is completed for lands inventory or land strategies and such, we want to focus the staff that work onto our broader asset management planning for all of our lands and facilities. So, yeah, unfortunately, the time frame and the requirements are such that we have the land strategies first by 2024, and then we'll have the staffing in place with the knowledge of our lands and our facilities to then focus in on our broader asset management planning beyond that. I know municipalities have had requirements for asset management planning and provincial funding provided to support the asset management planning, but we haven't been able to get those funds where we've not been eligible.
So any questions from online? No, okay. So what we'll do now is we need to provide staff with some direction. So they provide us with some alternatives, and certainly there's a limited amount of alternatives if we want to go down that road. But I would certainly entertain some discussion from the board on where they feel comfortable within either this budget, the presented document, or the alternatives. So we can try to have a motion come for debate. Would anybody like to provide input on that, on where they would like to see? I do have one previous question on that. Before we start, is the $811,000 deficit? We've heard that that's not traditionally something that usually we do have a deficit, but those are usually in different programs where we know funding could be coming from. This one might be more difficult. How is staff recommending that deficit be made up? Is it through the use of reserves or through additional levy next year? Or would they have further, what is the plan? Or is it just going to be a deficit on the paper? So could you maybe expand on that a little bit, Christine? Or Tracy?
Yeah, through the chair. What's being shown on the budget worksheet is that it's being drawn down from our reserves. We know that we have been drawing down reserves. The arrow that shows kind of the reserves amounts from both capital on the left to operating on the right. Top value showing what that reserve amount would be, starting balance approximation. So that what that would be if the 811,000 was realized and that drawdown. Certainly, that is a concern to continue to rely on reserves for this type of funding in the long term, because Christine will say it's not good accounting. We can't continue to do that. We have to have a healthy amount of reserve for those unforeseen circumstances and other needs as they arise.
So I'll put the question to the board this way. Do you think your member municipalities would rather see a larger levy increase, or do you think they'd rather see a use of reserves for that, with the understanding that this is a finite resource that we have, and these reserves are not just put away for this purpose, they're for purpose. So Dean.
I could confirm that the first preferred option would be to use reserves first. We call it a tax stabilization fund. Probably the other municipal councils call it the same idea, but it's essentially a reserve, but it's used to cushion the impact of a high levy assessment. So to answer the question, the first option, the third option would be to use reserves, knowing that it's finite. Not the best way to do business, but it is a finite resource. But the ratepayers are under a lot of strain, so.
That staff, what were the reserves traditionally? Why these are the balances of surpluses and deficits, correct? And were they, or is this, are these a result of planning as far as trying to pay for future assets?
In some cases, on the capital side, the reserves are planned. We levy in certain years more for capital repair than we might spend, because estimating the cost of the spending in each year is a very difficult thing. And capital spending takes place over crosses years as well. So on the capital side, particularly for the flood control infrastructure for the dams, we levy and we try and keep it reasonably stable year to year because costs can fluctuate a great deal. On the operating side, the reserves are 70 years of surpluses. In the absence of a reserve policy and in the absence of a budgetary policy, we've never had one. So they're leftovers, and they do allow us to absorb small deficits in programs from year to year if they exist. But you can see the level of reserves is not high in light of the deficits that we're projecting for 2024 at this point. And there has not been a full analysis done about the level of reserves that we should be carrying that would normally flush out from a full asset management plan, which we haven't done in order to keep levy low. So the reserves being what they are is also a result of that line graph over the last 15 years.
Perfect. So I think that gives us some direction there. Is there kind of, does anybody have any different views around the situation, or is everybody in general agreement? Seeing some nods. The next question we have is what we want to do with category 3 programs. Again, do we want to put those on levy, or do we want to ask municipalities to fund those individually, like category 2 programs?
I think at this point, you ask them to fund them individually. We talked about what we would lose as additional funding if we were to roll it into the levy. Very early in discussion, Sandy said it's premature to get rid of level 3 now. I think if we get to a position where most or all of our municipalities say we don't want to support those programs, and we have a question, we either are going to move them into levy or eliminate them, then we have that discussion at that time. I think probably the board is going to lean towards moving into levy because we understand the value of those programs. But I don't think at this point we should make that decision, that we should give staff an opportunity to work with municipalities. And unless municipalities say, no, you want a huge increase in that and the levy, but plus you also want us to pay for these other programs, we're not going to do it. And I think we go ahead with the discussions as proposed at this point. If we have to make a difficult decision on levy 3s in a few months' time, then we'll do that at that time, but not now.
Yeah, I'm just kind of all over the place on this one, and this is where I like agreements. It would be so much easier. We have those agreements in place to really have a better understanding on making a decision here at the board. I'm very cautious as well. So one of the problems, so we're really not understanding our revenues going forward either. And am I wrong there when it comes to how we are going to do business moving forward? So we're not really understanding where our revenues are going to be coming from going forward from the report. So it says the extent of deferred revenues available for 2024 and beyond is now greatly reduced. So that makes me wonder, is this going to be the way we do business now with municipalities?
I think I can add something to that. If we go back to the graph that showed up there, it tells a story. You
Yeah.
can see the deferring of, you can see the absolute vacating of the budget by the province. Now, if we showed a list of regulations and rules, it would be a complete flip-flop. And you see the municipal line, and you can see the staff's work in there to try to make those funding sources. Unfortunately, as we heard with category 1, which is driving the majority of the cost, those sources are a lot slimmer compared to category 2 and 3 programs, and capital programs. So my guess, if I had to put something on there, it'd say that municipalities are going to share a much larger cost going forward. That's the only option available. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah.
So that's where our revenue streams would be coming from. We don't have that many. I would say that people probably have a much greater want and easeability to give to turtle programs. And it should, because there is a benefit, you can see the benefits rather than give to the day-to-day operations to run an organization at the level that's been asked to run to. So it's one of those things, you're probably not gonna see a lot of donations and self-generated funding revenue towards that sort of item, rather than we're gonna have to go to who has to pay to make sure that these items that are downloaded, that are directed to us from the province, you have to do this, but they have to pay. And that's where really there's 444 municipalities. Not all have conservation authorities, but they need to get in line and say, this is not acceptable. We're not asking these rules to be done. We're paying for our programs. We're asking through category 2 and 3. But this has a provincial benefit as well. And we need to get in line and say, you need to pay your fair share. It is not long ago. If you look back in the 60s and 70s, and maybe that is a long time ago, but in the long grand scheme of things, it's not. Province were much more partners, funding 50% of items because it had, and even when the conservation authority started, those conservation areas out there are there because the province said, this is a good idea, we want this to happen. Now there's zero funding. And they say, oh, why are you doing this? Because you wanted us to. So these things, this is the result we're seeing of regulations. And I guess I'm rambling on, but the point is that municipalities are going to have to pay more if the current trend keeps going. That's where our revenue source is coming.
Yeah, I appreciate that extra information. So as a city, we have 3 CAs, so that's going to be a broader conversation at council. But how do you see the negotiations going forward with municipalities when it comes to them paying for the levy? Like, will that be a direction coming from the board next month? I'm just trying to see how it all fits into place with timelines going forward.
Yeah.
So I'm prepared.
I appreciate that. Through the chair, yes, it's following our normal levy process. With going out, seeking feedback. Again, first getting feedback from our board members on a draft, to then take it to municipalities through the fall, seek their input, and then any revisions in January with a final budget proposed at our February AGM.
Heather, and then Paul.
Following up on the reserves, I'm just wondering, I don't know if I missed it, but how many operating months of reserves do we have? Or like how much reserve funds do we have? I guess I'm leaning towards option 1. But I don't want to pull $800,000 out of our reserves if it means we have like 2 months of operating reserve. You know what I mean? So I'm wondering around where we are at.
2 months.
2 months. Okay. Wow. That makes me feel less comfortable about choosing option 1. And then if we are able to, I guess following up on that, if we are able to get more soft revenue throughout the year, you don't give a levy back, I guess, at that point, and you can't extra levy halfway through the year.
Actually, we can, but we try not to.
Yeah.
We can levy net less next year. No, we can't. No, but we can levy if we take too much levy and we get soft funds to recoup that. We can levy less next year because we would need less. It creates a surplus, which goes into the reserves. And here we are. Cautionary tale about using reserves too much for stabilization. Ingersoll did this for years. They used all their to keep 0% tax increases. The fund ran out. And all of a sudden there was no reserves. And so you have 14, 17, 12% tax increases, no reserves, no nothing. So it is a cautionary tale of just because it seems, it may seem good while you're doing it, but all of a sudden you're going to pay drastically. I know London has also had a history of 0% tax increases.
Look at the roads.
The money has to come from somewhere to keep these resources going. So again, is it a balanced approach? I think that's the question of where does this balance out? And I get a question to staff, I guess, is this the big hit? Or next year, another big hit or another big hit? So can we balance this out a little bit? Obviously, we can't, there's only so much we can balance out, but next year, if we need that increase to get those reserves start going back again, is there an opportunity? Or are we just looking at, like, from my interpretation, this is the big hit. This is where the bulk of the funding is going to come. And then hopefully once the new system's in place, whether it's good or not is a different debate or what should happen, but are we going to see a more stable increase? If you have a crystal ball, depending on regulations, it changes.
Yeah, through the chair, the term that we've been calling this is our reset. Because we recognize this is entirely different framework, entirely different. They were having to categorize programs. And, we've been through, you try to look at the last 5 years as averages, for example, but we've been through COVID. We didn't fill positions, vacant positions for quite some time to offset those costs to our municipalities. We weren't eligible for the CERB funding. There's been so much uncertainty with what these legislative changes were going to bring that we've been very cautious and we haven't wanted to bring forward these required staffing complements to really get us up to delivering these mandatory programs now. Now we know what is mandatory in the future. So again, with the caveat, we never know what additional legislative changes might be coming our way again. But at this point in time, this is kind of how we've envisioned it.
I personally then would at least want to have a minimum of 6 months of operating reserve fund maintained. So I'm leaning more towards now option 2, which would be a large increase to our municipalities, a larger levy. We're doing both the increase in levy for category 1 and the increase in levy for the $811,000. I don't know if I don't want to start splitting hairs where it's like maybe we only increase it by 500,000 because then you're still going to be 300,000 short. But I guess long story short, I'm personally as a board member not comfortable of drawing down the reserve to the point where you have 2 months operating reserve left. I don't think that personally is a prudent financial decision. So I would prefer to go with something that at least retains 6 months operating or.
Oh, then
I'm gonna comment on the irony of this whole situation. If we go back 4 years, this whole process was started because some municipalities were complaining to the ministry that conservation authorities were out of control. We were raising levies, we were raising fees, unreasonable levels. And there was some infamous emails in the summer from the minister saying, we're going to bring you under control. You got to get back to your core programs. And then the various bills that have come out over the last 3 or 4 years have resulted in $1.5 million to us to implement all these changes. So what was supposed to be a cost saving measure to municipalities to control conservation authorities has resulted in untold millions across the province to municipalities because conservation authorities costs of implementing all these changes have gone up. So I know that doesn't inform the discussion as to what we're going to do right now, but that's the background that those of us have been around for 4 or 5 years. And the irony of how this is all panned out to us.
Go tell your CP.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't, when I made my response to your question earlier, I wasn't suggesting that we bleed the reserves dry, but I understand through my council work and from my own personal business work that leaning on your reserves is not the best way to do business. And I agree with what Councillor Frank is saying. You need to have some money calculated to in reserves to keep your business viable, but I'm only suggesting we draw from reserves as a temporary measure to buy us some time, like buy us at least a year, so that we can figure out what our financial situation is going to look like. And in the meantime, like what we're talking about here today, the challenges and what Paul said about, Sir Mitchell said about how things have progressed over the last 5 years. We need to communicate that to the municipal councils. And like that line, that blue line that's near the bottom of the graph, that's where the pressure really needs to be applied. And tell the province, like, enough is enough. The download, we're sick and tired of being sick and tired of the downloading, but we need to deal with the budget first, but the second part is the communications to the municipalities. And then in turn, kind of gather the group together and tell the province, like, this isn't right and it's not sustainable. It needs to be fixed. That's my thought on it.
I completely agree. So I don't know if that is a staff direction to make a little comms plan to go along with the submissions to our councils, because that would be very helpful for, I know, and counselors to be able to communicate that to our fellow counselors who will be like, why is this so much money? And we can actually explain adequately and clearly. I agree completely. And again, I know that staff are looking for direction on this. So I'm just wondering if there's a way perhaps to suggest increase the levy, but also draw down a little bit out of reserves to, I think, satisfy some of our participating municipalities that the Conservation Authority is aware, but maybe not to the extent that is suggested in here.
So what I'm hearing is people are basically on the same page here. We know that we don't want to overtax municipalities. We know that the province is the problem. I guess it doesn't matter. Province, kind of the same thing. At this point is at the same direction, is that they're not providing enough funding, and that we're going to have to find it someplace. So I'm comfortable with presenting to municipalities there and getting their feedback. I think it shows that if we do show an $800,000 deficit, that we are trying to lower the burden. And when I know it's not sustainable to do so, I would welcome any municipality to say, oh, no, wait, just put that on levy for us. Everybody has their pressures, and we can hope. But at the end of the day, I think that we're at a big change here, and I think there's going to be some ability in the future to try to balance this out as things normalize in the new realm. But I think that's where I'm going with it. But
I just want to try to break this down a little bit. We're not going to the municipalities until after October, right?
That's correct.
Okay, all right.
let's
So
get some more.
so we're going to get some more information. We'll have some idea of environment and climate change. Couple of other questions have come up in the discussion. I wanted to try and get my head around. There was the reminder that we didn't get, the conservation authorities did not get curb money. But wasn't there some sort of legal challenge to that? Is that gone anywhere? Is it still in the works? Is it dead? Through the chair to staff?
Yes.
We did not qualify for CERB funding. Toronto Region Conservation Authority has challenged that in tax court. And we've joined with a number of other conservation authorities to help that fight. But there's been no result of that yet.
Yeah, so it'll be Santa Claus money if it shows up. Okay, got it.
We're not counting on that.
All right. With campground fees, we've budgeted that accordingly. I didn't see that as one of the options in what you've presented to us.
Category 3.
It's category 3, but category 3 helps
Traditionally helped, yes,
by other programs, and in this budget, it's not. Is that right?
correct.
Okay. In theory, we could take portion to reduce the impact of category 1, right? We could change category 1 funding from 59% down to 55, right?
In theory,
In theory, but you're not recommending it
Oh, no, the capital spending needs of the campgrounds is over $1 million.
Right. Yeah.
And it's forecast to come out of the campground reserve. So,
The other question I have, we've thrown around the number of, projected 24% levy increase. I don't spend percentages, I spend dollars. What is that in dollars, please?
if you include what used to be levy, but which is in category 3 as cost apportioning, 2.2 million.
Well, roughly half of that. Well, more, it depends on how you want to do the calculation, but there's $1.5 million that is mandated. That's new. Right now, $1 million of it is in levy. All right. So out of that 2.2 million, 1 million is basically unavoidable cost right now. So I'm assuming our communication to municipalities is going to point that out. And we'll point out when we get to that granular level, London is paying out of that $1 million. Off the top of my head, I can tell you what the number is.
640,000.
Right, yeah, because we know what the municipal apportionment is. So, this is part of, in my mind, part of the communication that we get to with the municipalities. So they have a better understanding of this, because as I think we all pointed out at the beginning, this was a storm of information. And don't want to bury your colleagues on councils with that kind of stuff, because you're just going to go, "Ugh," like we all did when we saw this. But to be a little more serious on this is, again, I'm going to go back to what I started with, is one of the things we have to be conscious of is it's still a big number. And one of the controllables that we have is what we pay our staff. And you're budgeting 3%. I know this year's been god awful for inflation. But I think maybe the inflation is coming down. Is it going to get below 3%? I don't know. Ask any economist and they'll tell you, on one hand this and on the other hand that. The old joke is, can we find a one-handed economist? But do we have a sense of if it's 3%, it's X, if it's 2.75%, it's Y, it's a different number. How much do we save in every quarter move?
$37,500.
That's it?
Yep.
So just to comment on that as well, as much as COLA and cost of living may be coming, like the inflation may be coming down, it's also about competition within the market to keep qualified employees. We certainly don't want to, the cost of training new employees and attracting employees is one of those bigger issues of.
Well, when I just heard the number, it's trivial.
Yeah.
So never mind.
I guess that we do have some recommendations, and the recommendation, I think that we can all agree that the board report needs to be, this report needs to be received. And that the second one is that the 2024 budget be developed in conformity to the updated Authorities Act and regulations. I think that would probably be prudent. And that staff be directed for the 3% increase to be included in the budget. That doesn't mean it's passed, but I think it needs to be, we can have a further discussion later, but it's in there. And then the staff be directed to prepare a budget based on feedback received by members. I'm gonna just kind of wrap this up a little bit, because there's a lot to think about. There's lots of time to think about in between now and when we pass the budget. But is everybody kind of okay with presenting the budget with the $800,000 and with the $600,000 of category 3, asking for that to be paid for apportionment at this time, and get feedback, and then again in October, see how this changes, September, October, how that changes? Okay.
Yeah, I think the feedback is going to be important, so we have to get some form of direction, so I would be supportive.
So is that further, you're fine with that feedback?
And
Okay.
then, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on that, when it does come back in October, then we can further discussions and flexibility and conversations. Okay.
So it sounds like staff have heard us, and they're clear on that. So I would entertain a motion, to accept those recommendations. Paul, seconded by Anna.
Question, the feedback, does that include more information about the additional staffing? But
Yes, yes.
that be considered direction to staff as opposed to having to.
Is there any further things that people have talked about that they really want to have that number come back? I think we've heard about the percentage points, but
Well, yeah, Skylar had asked about the reserves, the 2 months.
yep.
Issue.
If we could have a calculation just to show what different levels of months,
Well,
obviously, we're
you
not
said
there
6 months, right?
I picked it arbitrarily.
Oh,
well, I think this will be informed, as Christina said, through asset management. It'll show, as we go through these processes, it'll show where our asset our reserves need to be to make sure that we're, that may not be forthcoming in this budget because we just don't have, those plans need to take place. It's a further exercise, but we do know that we won't run out of reserves at this point if we pass this budget, so that's a positive. Or a surplus, I guess. So with, as any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you, everyone. I know that's a big one. I appreciate staff. I just think what staff had to go through to get us to this point to present this. I'm sure there was a lot of head scratching of how things were, the new way of doing things, so I appreciate that. We will now go down to item 6.3, which is committee meeting schedule. I don't hear that Tracy as well, just for.
Yes, thank you through the chair. Just a recommendation arising from the hearings committee to schedule meetings quarterly. There's lots of back and forth quickly with Michelle to schedule these things, but to have something on our calendars for future meetings be brought forward in 2024. So you can see that schedule for next year in November, but just for the remainder of this year to have a couple dates already scheduled would be helpful.
Any questions of the report? See none. Is there a mover for the recommendation? Hugh, by Hardy. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And now we will move on to 6.3 land inventory.
I just wanted to recognize Brandon Williamson, who's in the room here. Where is he? There he is. And as mentioned earlier, he's when we were talking about these inventories and strategies, there's a number of conservation authority staff that gather together with expertise and provide oversight and often a template for all CAs to use. So Brandon's been sitting on the land Conservation Ontario CA working group is to develop the template for our lands inventory. And that's been provided. You can see the breadth of information that's being collected through our inventory, and then that inventory will then start and form the basis for developing our lands management strategies and disposition and acquisition policies as well. So with all of that, lots to do, and you will notice that in one of the mandatory, which are highlighted in bold requirements, there is one field called develop, and that is to look for suitable lands for development, and whether a parcel or a portion of the parcel is suitable for the purposes of housing and housing infrastructure development. So just thought I'd draw your attention to that portion of the table too, because that's something that we don't really have a true definition on, but we certainly will have to continue to be looking at our lands in that lens as well. So again, much of this will be completed in the 2023 pieces of our budget already, but there'll be that finalization and carryover into 2024 as we further use these to apply our lands management strategies.
Straight percent of clarification. All right.
Brandon, can you confirm with the recommendation number 2 on the
Looking at the date that year.
2023? in 2024?
To the chair, yeah. A lot of the inventory will be this year. Gathering the information, the spreadsheet. Enough to get us baseline data for the CA strategy. It's coming next year. We started this year, but we'll be worked on throughout the year. And that information sitting in a spreadsheet in a database form in order to start to work on some of the missing links, missing pieces of information that we don't have throughout 2024. So, a lot of the cost is happening right now to gather the data and that we already have and put it into one place. But then once we have that information enough to start the CA strategy, we still have a lot of work to do in 2024 to put that information in. And there's missing gaps of information that we have to either purchase from TerraNet or go to other sources to find out information on those properties. Properties that we purchased between 92 and 95, where we don't have a lot of information on those properties as far as what fund we bought them under, how did we acquire that thing.
And then.
Question, through the chair to staff is one of the objectives was that at some point, some of this land may need to be disposed. And the proceeds, how can they be used? Again, is there, my recollection was there was something specified in the legislation about that. Wasn't there?
Through the chair, no, I don't believe there is a specification. It was always our intent, though, that any surpluses that were funds that were received through lands that were identified as surplus, I should say, would then be put back into lands management activities as a specified reserve fund.
So is there any chance any of that would take place during 2024 that would have an impact on our reserve situation? Or given the timing of this, we're looking at 2025 at the earliest? And I see Brandon nodding his head that it's probably 2025 before.
Chair, yeah. Once the inventory is complete by the end of 2024, then we'll have an idea of which properties or portions of properties are available for disposal for development. And then that will coincide with the CA strategy, which a component of that is an acquisition and disposition policy. And that will inform in conjunction with what, so the inventory is essentially, this is a piece of land that does not have any regulatory restrictions on it or conservation easements or other restrictions. Then the strategy will look at that, will provide an acquisition disposition policy, and that will inform us as to if we do want to dispose of that part. So we're talking, I think, 2025 or 26 before we really have a concrete idea of which parcels we want to dispose of our portions of, at least 2025.
I'm gonna, somebody might have to cut me off if we get into the camera stuff when I'm asking this question, but
Cut off.
yeah.
And it's a question,
Do we
don't
go
ask.
down?
Anna, please.
Oh, wait.
Well, let's see.
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
In the hands of the chair.
I'll let Sandy.
Didn't we go through an exercise a number of years ago about a particular section, and is that possible to fast track that? And I'm only looking for a yes or a no. I'm not getting into any detail. I'm hoping Brendan knows which I'm talking about.
So the chair, yeah, there is an option to, or there is a possibility of fast track, but I think 2025 would be the soonest.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
I think it also comes down to resources, which translates into levy. You can always make things happen faster with more resources.
Yeah.
It depends on available resources.
Disposing.
I am concerned as well about what's the definition of a developable land? You know, there may be a piece that's not regulatory, okay, we don't. Well, no, but
All
it,
land is development.
at what time point is the thing that you're looking at, is if you have a piece in the middle of a rural municipality, that could be used for housing, but the time frame for that is 100 years out at the growth rate that we're seeing, is that land developable? And I think that we'll have a pretty reasonable approach of saying we're depending on where that is, but there is a question about that. Even within a municipality such as London, municipality is very large. There's lots of rural areas, and whether that land is developable or not is a very good question in a reasonable time frame. And let's be honest, land that's close to being developed is worth a lot more than something that's way out. And it may be, we could use funds as well, and so it may not be as prudent to sell it at this time as it's when it's closer to being able to be developed. Because we have our shareholders as well, there's municipalities, and so if we sell something and then 10 years later becomes worth a lot more, we'll probably hear from it. So these are all things that have to be considered when we're creating these land strategies. It becomes complicated. Anna, please.
Yeah, just going to the recommendation number 2, where it's talks about the cost, and I heard from Brandon that a lot of the costs are being borne this year. And given that this is a new expense, I would think, where's the money coming from, and do we generally know what the costs are going to be for 2023?
We don't have a. We'll know more about the cost for 2023. Probably by the end of September. And where it's coming from is current budget, just staff time. It was a mandated item.
So it's staff.
And it's given to us, the deadline was 2024, end of 2024. However, in order to meet the deadline for the CA strategy and the core watershed management strategy, we have to gather this land inventory information. We have to know what we have, when we purchased it, what restrictions are on it. And in order to do that, in order to get those other 2 strategies completed by the end of next year, we needed to get started on this land inventory piece ASAP. So we're essentially doing it out of operating budget currently, just staff time to pull this information together.
I wanted to thank you.
Further questions? See, now, is there a mover for the recommendations? Skylar, seconded by George. Any discussion on that? Paul?
Yeah, this is a report I'm really looking forward to, because the Upper Thames has a lot of land, and a lot of land that was purchased for a project over the last 50 years that has been canceled. And we talked in budget discussion about our concern about bringing down our reserves to dangerous levels. We talked about asset management plan that we're working on, and this information we're going to get from this report all ties into this. This land is in an area where farmland is as high as it is anywhere in Ontario, if not Canada. So it has huge value, whether it's developed or farmed, which farmers are around the table. That's the way we like to use land. And I think once we get this information, we tie it in with the asset management plan. I think we'll have some really interesting discussions about not only our land management, but our financial stability going for the next 10 to 20 years based on this information. So I'm really anxious to see what this information brings forward to us.
Excellent. Any further discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Do we want a small break before we go into closed session? Some nods. Okay, let's break for 5 minutes. Use the washroom, and then we'll go on.
Text.
Entertain a motion to approve the recommendations as were presented and closed. Mark, seconded by Dean, discussion on those. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move to reports for information. 8.1 Administrative Enforcement, Section 28 Status Report. Are there any questions of the report? Seeing none, can I have a mover to receive for information? Skylar, second by Jim. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And then we'll move down to 8.2 project status updates. Are there any questions of that report? Being none, a mover and a seconder for that. Anna to receive his information, Harsh for second, discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. 8.3 2023 mid-year financial update. Any questions of that report? Seeing none, mover and a seconder for that. Skylar and Dean. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And we'll go to hazard mapping and modeling consultation update. Questions of that report? Seeing none. Peter, did you have your hand up? Okay. Okay, mover and a seconder for that report. George, Skylar for second, discussion on that. Oh, Sandy.
Just a quick question. How are things proceeding with the work we've been doing over the last couple of years with Dingman Creek? Is this related to that or different? Or are we doing two separate projects here?
Through the chair, it's definitely related. The two projects, yes, it is a different timeline for Dingman. We've been certainly working with the city to coordinate efforts. We understand the city would like to go out consultation this fall. It aligns with when we also want to have our hazard mapping and modeling out for consultation and discussion this fall as well. But we'll be taking out in different blocks, and I'll pass it over to Chris to see if he wants to add anything to that. Or...
No, just referring back to the EA that's been going on in Dingman, really, the driver in the Dingman watershed. So separate process being handled differently than we are with the rest of the watershed.
Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, through the chair to staff, just wondering when public consultation process will start. Do we know timelines going forward yet, or?
I can say our goal is to try to be going out in November of this year to start the process. And as we refer to in the report, kind of in packages, kind of in chunks. But we are having internal meetings to kind of finalize our approach in terms of how we are working with our municipalities. So things will start in real earnest in September. We're doing a lot of behind the scenes right now. And then hoping to begin to go out to the public in November.
Yeah, thanks for that information. I know the community is looking forward to that consultation process. Thanks.
Mark, please.
Might be a bit of a roundabout question, but once the hazard mapping, modeling or whatever is completed, and of course we have Bill 23 to deal with, what point in time does this become public information? Let's say a developer somewhere can sort of say, well, the UTRCA is a map that says that's not hazard plan or not floodplain property. I want to go ahead and build my subdivision here. Again, with Bill 23 being a factor in that as well, more homes.
Yes, and through the chair, that's exactly it. We want to have these up-to-date hazard maps for both floodplains, but also erosion hazards and wetlands, because those are unstable soils and they are sinks for holding floodwaters as well. So to have the right up-to-date information, so when any development application comes forward, whether it be through a permit process, because it's an individual landowner wanting to do something on their property, or something through the Planning Act that requires a change in zoning or official plan amendment to allow for more development, that information will be up to date and be able to identify where those hazards exist for any development or Section 28 permit process.
But just the UTRCA, in fact, though, would be the owner of said propriety of information, not say the province of Ontario. I mean, I think of other things too that we've gone through lately with the green belt and whatnot, to sort of say someone's gonna rubber stamp something and sort of say, no, you can go forward with that without getting proper permission or to understand the, as you would say, the list of pitfalls of the property.
Yes, through the chair, there are certain provisions that still allow for ministerial building. Yes, we might own the mapping itself and be able to identify those hazards, but there's other mechanisms in place for decision making.
So it's an interesting thought as well, is that these things are complicated. It's there is technology. It's certainly as proven with technology, there'll be more be more feasible to have these things happen on a faster basis, to have more real-time, up-to-date mapping. It'd be easier to do that. In conversation with Tracy, a lot of these used to be contour mapping. That was the best that you could do with the technology. And as technology progresses, hopefully that will help. I think the province has a great role to play in this. It's concerning to me that the province doesn't have this information of what Ontario looks like. And that's something I think that they could really play a role across Ontario, is providing funding and incentives for technology to be produced to make it easier for this to happen. These are certainly things I think everybody would agree are slowing down development where it could happen, because you don't have the ability, you just don't have the information to make a decision on. Certainly no one wants things to happen in an unsafe environment where someone's house is going to slide away or be people are going to get at risk of being injured by a flood or killed. But technology improvements have happened, but it's not at that level where it's just real time, or it's going to take time to get there. But where real funds can be put into play, that could help move those things along. And not be put on the back of this municipalities to make that happen. Further questions? I did. Okay, perfect. Excellent. Well done. I will, any further discussion? Saying that, all is in favor? Opposed, that is carried. And we will move on to the next one, which is 8.5 wetland compensation policy update. Is there any questions on that report? Sandy.
As I understand it, this is really, and it's pointed out in the last paragraph of the report, that this is really only dealing with interference with the removal of wetlands from a natural hazard perspective. It doesn't look at it holistically because of the ecological value. That's because we're dealing with new regulations. So it's kind of an editorial. I'm encouraging the member municipalities, you probably need your own policies on for wetland compensation if required for ecological reasons. I know the City of London permits replacement of wetlands, and the policies deal with natural hazard as well as ecological. But, you know, it's something at a municipal level, if you want to protect your wetlands or replace your wetlands for ecological values, you'll need your own policies because the upper towns can't protect you. That fair to say? So the policy that our staff are developing are relatively narrow, I would think. And that's another function of the changes in the regime of regulations that we're facing.
Further questions? We have a mover for to receive it. Anna. Seconder, Skylar. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, it's carried. And we'll move on to 8.6, the fall events. I'll just say that this is great to see. There's lots of stuff going on, and things are going to be lots of things to attend, and yeah, it's good to see that everybody's getting back out and doing so. Good to see that trees are being planted, and that students will, when they're in, especially in the City of London and in the area, they'll be trained in what we're doing and the risk that facing us all, especially in that river valleys. Any other questions for the reporters? Seeing none, is there a mover and seconder? Paul to move. Jim to second. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. 8.7 is August for your information report. I'll ask for a mover and second to receive that. Sandy has moved and George to second. Discussion. There's always lots of great things to see in there. Again, I really appreciate the format. It adds a lot to it, and make sure you subscribe. I love that every time. If it's not through the description, it does ask you to subscribe right away. So that's very important. Maybe you have to like click a button and make it not subscribe. That's the tip. Discussion on that. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. And committee update. So this is a new one that I appreciate, and that allows us, the committee, hopefully will spur some interest from the board to have other members sit on the committees as well, and provide an update for what's going on in that work that's going on there. I will ask if there's, would you like to add anything to that, Tracy?
No, I just, again, appreciate the comment from updating our administrative bylaw to include these. I think, again, it'll be great to have the board more engaged in what we're doing, and the reports providing me links. I guess that's the next one. But certainly if there's more information, the links are on our website.
Yeah, if the board's so okay with it, I will ask for a recommendation to receive both 9.1 and 9.2. Is someone willing to make that? Skylar and Paul, discussion. And all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. I don't believe we have any note, or is there any notice of motions? Seeing none.
You're the mover and shaker.
See, the best predictor of future behaviors, past behaviors. So I guess we'll take us down to chair's comments. The summer has certainly flew by, and we're getting into another season of budget talks and change within the Conservation Authority. As I said before, it seemed like when we started this process, there was all this time ahead of us, and we didn't know it was coming. And now it's rapidly approaching what it will be, and certainly that brings new challenges, especially for our board. We have a lot of new members, a lot of old members, in which everything is new again. So that creates challenges where we will have to step up as representatives of municipalities, and maybe do a little bit more than we would have had to do in past budget years. Although there was always work to do to explain what we were doing, this one is special, and so we will have to advocate and make sure that our fellow counselors know what is happening and the reasons behind that. Certainly have a great staff for questions. I certainly want to thank Christine and her crew and all the staff, because I can understand how big a change this is from what's been done ever before. So, and just trying to even understand what it all means. So thank you for that. I think it all, what it really does is brings out all our fears that we had at the beginning of this process and why we were so hesitant about it. It wasn't just because we were against change and didn't want to meet the goals of what the government had in store. We all knew that we've always wanted to do better, and we all know the need of housing and try to get development and try to make sure that we're being efficient. But at the same time, this was the reasons why we were so, because we understood that just because change happened, there is consequences to that. I think everybody in member municipalities know that there's not 20 people waiting behind anybody's organization's door waiting for something to do. Everybody's busy, and it's usually the lack of the opposite of that happening. So I thank everybody's participation, especially in that item today. That's a big one. It's not too often that you get Sandy going, oh my God, what's going on here? It's pretty hard to stump. So it's one of those things you can see the change that's happening. And so good on staff. That's a good challenge, Sandy. But no, I guess that's my comments. I guess, enjoyed the turtles immensely. It's always great to see the work that staff do without. The only other thing I'll pop in there was we were here for the pre-meeting, and I had a chance to go. I just went through a tour. I don't know if I was supposed to go in the campgrounds, but I did. But there's a little restaurant shack there, and I'll say they make great burgers. So if you're hungry afterwards, go for it. It was great. So you never know what you'll find at UTRCA. I'll turn it over to members' comments. You.
Just a question, if at some point in time, I think we're the only two that were here when this building was built, and it's been about 10 years. If just a update on the building, if there's been things that worked out really well, things maybe didn't work out so well, if we've saved a lot of money or anything like that, just kind of a report on the building. And I wouldn't expect that this year you've got budget to do and stuff like that. So maybe possibly sometime in the beginning of next year, just kind of an update on everything. We really appreciate it.
I understand, like we're going through, there's a lot of municipalities that are looking to build stuff. And I think this is a great example when you think outside the box about the benefits of it. We don't remember a tour, it's past what we thought it would do, but we don't know. Even get it. So it's one of those things where, we should share that information. So it's not lost. Appreciate that. Other comments? With that, I'll turn it over to Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for that comment, Hugh, because I know when other municipalities are building new infrastructure, West Perth look at their building, Zora Township looking at their building, we had an opportunity to invite them in with their contractors and tour them around and talk about what things worked well and give them ideas. So I must say, going up to West Perth County building, there's a lot of familiarity there, right down to the carpet tiles, exactly the same. So but certainly we're happy to help, and I think that's a great idea. As for comments, I just say that, it's been a very busy summer. It flew by, and looking forward to the fall as well. September 6th, you'll be getting a notice if you haven't received it already from Conservation Ontario. The Laternal Conference is coming up, and I think registration opens on September 6th. In the dates are in October 24th, I believe, 26th, but certainly have a look at the symposium there. It's at the Royal Botanical Gardens, and lots of different topics covered, tours in the one afternoon with concurrent sessions the rest of the day. So if you're interested, certainly reach out.
Yes, if you're interested, please let me know as soon as possible.
I'm interested.
So yes, we made sure that our meeting dates didn't provide a conflict for that, because it is a great opportunity to see what other CAs are doing to it. With that, thanks for the discussion today. It was to work on and working in what direction that we're seeking feedback on. But yeah, it's been lots of work there and the work by the managers and especially Christine and putting this all together in a new format. And we'll be looking this fall as well as providing a 2024 and a 2025 budget. So we'll be able to see what that looks like over the next couple of years with the forecast out for the 2026 and 2025. Yeah, so with that, thanks again.
With that, I'll call for adjournment. Arch, please, thank you. Your adjourn.
Take care.
You wanted